Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Celtic Way. I am your host, John McGinley. I'm joined by Ryan McGinley. We're here to chat through all the latest Celtic news and events and matches. And Ryan, I wish we were here in more and happier circumstances, but it's the day after what was another dreadful Celtic performance yesterday at Dens Park. Defeated 2-0. Dundee deserved their win, I felt, especially with their first half performance. And Celtic are in a pretty rough place at the moment. We're going to get into all the issues. How are you feeling today, though, after yesterday? I know you did live shows yesterday, so how are you feeling 24 hours on?
It's like Groundhog Day, almost. I feel like we've been here before a number of times this season already. We'll probably talk about the same things over and over again, but that's just how this season feels at the moment. Yeah, as much as I would say that the reaction show helped me sort of get over the result, because we were able to air our grievances live on air, and there was so many people watching live, which we really do appreciate, and plenty of people were watching, catching up on the show later on, which we also appreciate. But yeah, I'm still feeling pretty much the same as yesterday, to be honest with you. It's not a great place to be in at the moment, unfortunately, for all concerned with Celtic, but I'm sure we'll get into it.
Yeah, before we start, just a quick word for our sponsors. It's Simply Furniture, an independent brand dedicated to bringing luxury and contemporary style into homes across the UK. Their dedicated team ensures your furniture is delivered with care right to your doorstep. They have over a decade of experience in furniture retail. They meticulously source only the finest pieces, curated for quality, comfort and timeless design. And if you want to see their range up close, you can visit their showroom in Hillington, Glasgow. And if you mention the Celtic Way, you will get a special in-store discount. There's links below in the description if you're interested in what they have to offer. Now, Ryan, I feel like the big talking points, and hopefully we don't repeat ourselves too much, Ryan, but I feel like the big talking points coming out of the fixture revolve around Brendan Rodgers' handling of the team. I think there's a lot of discussion, I've noticed, of how he handled the media, press conference at Dens Park yesterday as well. So we're going to go through a bit of that. I think, for starters, Celtic were just... There are a continuation of problems that we've seen again and again at Celtic yesterday. And I think the issue for me, and the issue for a lot of Celtic fans, is that Brendan Rodgers doesn't seem to be changing anything tangible, either within his team selection, within his tactics, or within anything really, to try and get something different out of this Celtic team. Now, he might argue that he changed at half-time and he changed the formation and he tried something different, and it wasn't spectacular difference, but I think there's a difference between setting up a team in a certain way and then changing it in a panic at half-time, which again is what it came across. And listen, I said after the Braga game that I felt those changes at half-time were of a panicky nature and that the team weren't really particularly prepared for it. I mean, the team said that after the Braga game, and they said it's not something they'd particularly worked on. So for me, when you're deploying to a different formation at half-time, when the team's not particularly trained in that system or worked on that system, that to me screams panic. And that's not what fans are calling for. Yes, they're calling for changes, but they're calling for it to be done in a pretty controlled and measured way and not haphazardly.
Yeah, completely agree. I think it's an admission that the tactics and the formation and the personnel that was chose was wrong. The fact that you're changing it at half-time because you're 2-0 down. Of course, you look at the scoreline and it was 2-0 at half-time. The tactics clearly weren't working. The personnel that were on the park clearly weren't functioning to an acceptable standard. This is a Dundee team that have struggled a lot this season. They conceded 4 goals to Aberdeen last time out, whereas Celtic didn't lay a finger on them, basically, apart from a couple of speculative shots and one from Ian Atcho towards the end, which was a good save from the goalkeeper. It was a panic, and it's something that you don't really associate with Brendan Rodgers and his 2 spells at the club whatsoever. I don't associate panic with him. I associate him as a calm manager that gets his tactics right more often than not. It just screams out that at the moment something's not working, whether that be the manager and his players. The comments are more than just a little bit alarming after the game as well. I'm sure we'll go on to them. I know we've got graphics lined up with the Rodgers comments, but just something is not right at the club. But then again, a lot is not right at the club, so it's only natural that it then boils onto the pitch and starts happening on the pitch rather than just the off-field stuff. But to be fair, it's been like this all season. This sort of result, the most it's unsurprising in a way, because we've seen this sort of result coming for a few weeks, maybe even a few months now, because of the way that Celtic are playing. They weren't going to get away with playing the way that they have been forever. Eventually they were going to come undone, and that was the case yesterday, unfortunately. And there's plenty of finger pointing, but I think the manager's got to take the majority of the blame for yesterday, unfortunately.
So Tony Haggerty was at Dens Park yesterday for the Celtic Way and was in Brendan Rodgers' post-match press conference and got to ask Brendan Rodgers 3 questions, I think. Now, we can't make Brendan Rodgers give the right answers or give an answer that people are happy with. All we can do is ask certain questions that we feel are pertinent to the situation that Celtic are currently in. So I'm going to run through the questions that Tony asked and Brendan Rodgers' responses to them. So Tony's first question was around the motivation of the players. He asked, is that a problem motivating the players? Because there's been a lethargy around the squad for most of the season. Brendan Rodgers' response was it's confidence as well. When you're a team that's flowing and scoring goals, then of course the confidence is there. We always felt there were goals in the team, so when you don't look like you're going to score the goals, then that can affect you. We've got a great bunch of boys at the club, good guys that work hard every day, and it's all about self-motivating as well. It's that drive and desire. Like I've said before, this was a period I was really looking forward to because it's the challenge and you want to show how good you are as a player and how good you are as a team. Today we didn't do that, and we'll have to regroup again and go on Thursday. So not particularly anything earth-shattering from the response to that question. Tony also asked what Brendan Rodgers can do personally on a personal basis, because obviously there's a lot of discussion around the players, there's a lot of discussion around other aspects of the club and how well prepared the board were in terms of the summer and strengthening Brendan Rodgers' squad. But Tony wanted to ask Brendan Rodgers what he can do personally to improve the situation. Brendan Rodgers' response to it was, obviously you're trying to look at the different ways the team is set up. Obviously we've changed the structure at half time and tried to find different solutions that way. I'll always look at myself first and analyse myself and where I can be better. It's my responsibility to try and find a way to get what I can out of the players that we have at this moment. That will always be the first port of call. Tony also asked just on team selection, because as you alluded to there, Ryan, when you make so many changes at half time in terms of bringing 2 players on and changing the formation, the natural question is, did he feel like the way he picked the team was the best way to win that match? So that was Tony's next question, just on team selection. Brendan Rodgers had a long pause before he answered this question, and then he said, if you lose a game, you'll always be criticised. That's all part of it. We're trying to get goals. I'm playing a boy in Benjamin Negrin in midfield, who's the highest scoring midfield player that we have at the club. He's coming in from last year. We're getting 16 goals. In a team that is suffering for goals, you want to try and look to your goal scorers. We've got Yang coming in on the side. It's an area we know that we're suffering in. He's coming in to try and make an impact. It didn't quite work for him, and that's on me. As you say, hindsight's a great thing. You lose a game, you take responsibility as the manager. I accept that. Not particularly satisfying answers from Brendan Rodgers, I would suggest. Ryan, it's clear something's not quite going right, but he says he's been saying continuously, look, it's on me to find the answers, but as he's saying that, the answers haven't really come consistently to any great degree this season.
No, they're not transpiring whatsoever. In fact, the questions are getting, I would say, louder and more urgent, especially when, yes, and I get that they won the last game against Motherwell, but there was even question marks in that performance as well. It was a last minute one, or an injury time winner from Daisen Maeda. But yesterday was just, there was almost an acceptance yesterday when Celtic went 2-0 down. And I noticed this on social media as well. You like to keep a track of what people are saying online and what the general gauge of emotion that the Celtic supporters have. There was an acceptance that Celtic were going to lose that game, even though they had another 45 minutes to potentially change it. I just think there is no belief. There's no belief from the supporters to the players, and if that belief's not there, I just don't know where the belief is coming from the manager to the players as well. There was so much time for Celtic to get back into that game yesterday, and as I was watching it, and I was just watching the time going down, it was 45, 50, 55, 60, and nothing was transpiring. They had so much of the ball. There was tweets going out yesterday of how much percentage Celtic had of the ball, but they were doing absolutely nothing with it. It was a really, really frustrating watch and really difficult to do ratings as well. I was doing the player ratings for the site yesterday. Don't know how many times I used the word anonymous for players. I must have used that about 5 or 6 times because there were so many players that just didn't impact the game whatsoever. Just on those 2 players that he'd mentioned, I think those were doubts even before coming into this game about what impact they can bring into the team. I'm not really sure what Benjamin Negron is bringing apart from the odd goal here or there. I think we all know what Yang isn't going to bring to the team, and it's consistent quality, but he shouldn't have been put in that position yesterday, and that's another game in which I think Brendan Rodgers has hung the player out to dry. He's simply not good enough, and yet he's still starting games for Celtic.
Yeah, and listen, Brendan Rodgers might lament his options, and we'll come on to that in a moment in terms of the comments he made about this quality of the squad and what he's been given. And for me, that's true, right? I don't think the squad is good enough. I think everyone accepts that. I think everyone accepts that the squad was not strengthened to the degree that it should have been this summer, and that's without doubt, right? But Brendan Rodgers isn't helping the situation. For me, Brendan Rodgers, it feels like he's making it worse to an extent, and is reliance on players who clearly aren't getting the job done. And also, the players who have come into the club. Now, Brendan Rodgers might not fancy a Shin Yamada. You know, he might not fancy Jemai Simpson-Pusey. He might not fancy some of the other players that have arrived. He might not fancy Callum Osmond. He sees these players in training. He is paid to make the decision whether to select them for a match squad or not. But I think when there's players coming in and you're calling for freshness in your team, at least give them a chance to show something, because I think going back to the well of Johnny Kenny and Hyun Jun Yang, who players we know are not going to make it at Celtic, right? For just me, my personal opinion is that these players are not going to make it at Celtic, and I think that has been apparent for quite some time. So why not try something different? Why not try find that freshness from somewhere else? We brought Colby Donovan into the team, and he had an initially good impact. He had some difficult moments along the way, but that's part of learning as a young player. Again, he's just nowhere to be seen now again, and Ralston comes back into the team. So Brendan Rodgers is calling for freshness. There are elements of that within the squad that might be able to give something different. We don't really know yet, but he's just not going to those sources at all. He keeps going back to the same players who either look completely devoid of motivation to play for Celtic anymore, or are just struggling for form outright. And I feel like he has to test different things out. If he's true to his word that he wants to try different things at Celtic, it's time to show that. For me, the time to show that was weeks ago, Ryan. But I think this has to be like a line in the sand where Brendan Rodgers says, look, I've got to try and work with some of these different players here. I've got to try and find something within the squad, because what he's doing again and again, picking the same players, the same formation, it isn't working. It's months and months out of date, Ryan.
It is, and I think they've got to bring some of these players in. Particularly, I would say Shin Yamada, who, despite what Brendan Rodgers thinks about him as a player, whether he's going to make it in a Brendan Rodgers side, a couple of seasons ago he was scoring a lot of goals in Japan. He scored at an all-right level, and he can clearly put the ball in the back of the net. And when I saw him against Rangers at Ibrox, I thought he was actually one of the players that showed character in the second half of the game. It was another turgid performance from Celtic, but he was one that actually wanted to try and make things happen. For whatever reason, it seems as if since it was announced that he wasn't going to be in the Europa League squad, we've not seen him. I don't think we've seen him since that, to be honest. It's almost as if that's where he is now. He's not fancied for the Europa League squad, and then just by default you won't see him domestically either. And you could say that about a couple of other players too, which is unfortunate. But I just think and I completely agree with you, we do need to see something different from this Celtic side, because what is happening just now, the players that are continuing to get picked aren't performing. So we need to see something. Something's got to change. Whether that's the formation, whether that's personnel, whether it's a mix of both. Personally, I would hope it's a mix of both, because what's going on right now just isn't transpiring positively. It's not working into results.
Yeah, and listen, I don't think anyone's saying that Shin Yamada is going to come into this team and be a superstar for Celtic. I think it's unrealistic to expect that. But it's just this sense of Brendan Rodgers saying that, because for 6 months in the build-up to the transfer window, he was talking about some of these players are coming to the end of their cycle. We need to keep motivation fresh in the team. We need to try different people. And then an influx of new players do come into the team, and Brendan Rodgers barely uses any of them. And listen, that is his right. Again, he might not fancy them, and they might be much worse than everyone knows or thinks. But frankly, it's not working out at the moment. So how can you not at least give some room to some of these players to try and make an impact in this team is what I would say. I mean, if Shin Yamada is not any better than Johnny Kenny, then I've got serious concerns about even more serious concerns about recruitment at Celtic than I did coming out with the summer. You know, that would be my message on that. And just on tactics and changing tactics, this wasn't in response to Tory. This was in response to another journalist, but he was asked about had he feared this situation. You know, given his options coming out of the summer, was this a situation that he had feared? And he said it was clear in the summer, but it's really in the past now. There's nothing we can do about it. We had the opportunities to do what we needed to do. It didn't happen. And then he went on to say, so now it's finding ways, whether it's 4-3-3, whether it's 3-4-3, whether it's 3-5-2. We're trying to look at all these different permutations within the team, but ultimately you need that quality to break down teams that are low on the pitch. And for us this season, that's been the real challenging aspect for us. But it's a challenge that I relish. I want to be here to, as I said, to make the difference for the players that are here at this moment. So he's again alluding to this kind of three-man defence and an alternative formation at Celtic, which, listen, I think people have been calling for quite a while. I think it's maybe taken Brendan Rodgers a bit more time than people expected to tinker with the formation of the team. I don't think it's that realistic to do this at half time and expect massive results. If he wants to change the formation, this needs to be worked on in advance of the game and deployed from the start of the game, so we get to see the setup from the beginning and see how these players cope with it. Now, what a back three at Celtic look like, I don't know, but there are plenty of central defenders in the squad, and we know Kieran Tierney can also play on the left side of a three as well, should he be needed. We also have Sriracha, who can play as more of a wing back if that's where he wants to go. There are options here to kind of move around the pieces in this formation. I think it's necessary because I think his current system is so reliant on wingers being top wingers who can really impact a match, and I just don't think it's there on the right hand side. And actually I've got worries about the left hand side too. As much as I enjoyed Tenecte's initial appearances for Celtic, I think what was he was described as before he arrived at Celtic, where he looks good on the ball and he will dribble a lot and he will attack defenders. It's his output that's a concern for me and his end product, which we've yet to see truly kick off, Ryan. And so when you have deficiencies on the left and the right wing, and you're playing a system that is so reliant on those wingers being the most impactful players, then that's when it's become a problem. And that is when, for me, you've got to look for a different formation, a different tactical system to get the best out of other players.
Yeah, I'm concerned about a number of things there. I'm concerned about Brendan Rodgers' comments. I just think I think they're all over the place, if I'm being honest, in terms of talking about different. I'm just being honest. It looks just completely all over the place, and it's not what I associate Brendan Rodgers with. I think the comments are all over the place. It's not the only comments that I believe are all over the place. I'm sure we'll probably get on to them. The comments that will probably hinder the squad rather than help them, especially if that gets translated to players. Just on the over-reliance, it is an over-reliance on the one side, because the right-hand side there is an admittance, and you saw that in the game yesterday. How many times did the ball go to Tenecte compared to Yang? Yeah. There's a reliance on the team. There's an acceptance that the other side isn't good enough to make anything happen. And then it becomes
predictable, Ryan, because if it's always going down the left, it's not just an over-reliance on one player and putting the pressure on that player. It becomes predictable about what Celtic are going to do, and then that would make it naturally harder for the left winger to make an impact.
That's my worry as well, because if they're so reliant on a player that's not all there yet, the signs are looking good in some areas of Tenecte, if I can say his name. I was saying it, but I can't say it today for whatever reason. The signs were looking good initially, but at Celtic, you need to be a volume winger. I always talk about it. Celtic need volume wingers. They need to have goals and assists to their game. It's good if they can beat a man, but what are they doing after they beat the man? Are they getting an assist? Are they getting a goal? It's all well and good being able to beat your marker, but eventually you become predictable. And Dundee marked him out of the game just by simply putting two men on him. Now that should immediately mean that there's somebody free, either on the other side or in midfield, because somebody's coming along to double team the player. But Celtic aren't quick enough to do anything about that, so they'll continue to just look to Tenecte and just hope that something happens there. So this over-reliance on a player that's not all there yet is a worry for me. And it's an admittance that on the right-hand side is just it's just there for formational purposes rather than an actual team. It's just there so that there's balance, so that there's actually a player on the right hand side rather than a useful weapon that Celtic can utilise in the game, which is really, really concerning to me.
Yeah, I want to be clear. What I'm saying about Tenecti is not necessarily criticism of him as an individual. I think it's a criticism of the situation we're in, where we're, like Ryan's saying, we're having to go to the well on this guy who's just arrived at the club and should be learning his trade at Celtic to become a Celtic player, regardless of his natural ability, which I think it's clear he has natural ability, okay? But it's also clear that he has to take his game to another level to be a consistent force at Celtic. That is undoubted for me. And that's not a slight against Tenecti at all. That's just the reality of moving clubs, moving into a highly pressurised situation. Again, I make the example, look at the Nicholas Kuhn situation. He took 6 months to warm up to the challenge at Celtic. And think about if we were over-reliant on Kuhn when Kuhn came into the club and we had Kuhn to be our main, we had to have Kuhn be our main man. We had other players in the team who were able to, have an impact at Celtic to the degree that Kuhn, it would be nice if he'd hit fire in his early stages, but it wasn't necessarily needed for Celtic to go on and do what they needed to do that season. So that's my point. We're expecting too much from Tenecti too soon as a result of other deficiencies in the team. The result of us not having a functioning right winger almost at all. Because if you don't go to Yang, you go to James Forrest, and listen, I like James Forrest, but he's not a 90-minute player. And then we've got Daizen Maeda. Even if Daizen Maeda was fit yesterday, which he wasn't, we've seen that he's had massive problems on the right flank as well. So there's just, and this again is something that everyone was talking about in the closing days after the transfer window. This is not a new thing. Everybody was looking at these squad depth charts and going, why does Celtic have so many players on the left side and no players on the right side? And what has gone into this transfer window that has just been a complete shambles of squad planning and execution for it to get to this stage, and that's where we are now. And Rodgers is picking up the pieces of that, and that's a difficult thing to do. But at the same time, as we're mentioned, I think it's fair to both say Rodgers wasn't best prepared for the season, but that Rodgers also isn't helping the situation at the moment. I'm not seeing what Brendan Rodgers is doing to add to this Celtic team right now, because he just keeps putting out the same team, almost the same team, the same collection of players in the same formation, and expecting Celtic to just find the self-motivation or whatever it is he talks about within them to then go and prove that they're Celtic players, or all of that things he talks about. But what is he tangibly doing to have to make change the outcome of these matches, Ryan, is what I'm asking. And that's my worry about Brendan Rodgers at the moment. And listen, he went on to make more comments, and these have become notorious comments, and I think, unfortunately for Rodgers, rightly or wrongly, they'll hang around him for a wee while, especially if results don't continue to improve. I think it was a slight misstep for him in the way that he framed what he was trying to say here. And he was asked about his squad, okay, and he says, I think the challenge from the summer now leading into here, we lost a lot of firepower, a lot of goals out of the team. There's no way you'll go into a race and be given the keys to a Honda Civic, and as you take off it said, we want you to drive it like a Ferrari. It's not going to happen. So until something changes, I have to find the solutions, because like I said, goals, speed, everything has come out of the team. We need to find a way to be better. Now listen, I think the reaction to these comments has been quite severe, and I've seen a fair amount of anger. I almost understand what he's trying to say here. I don't actually think he's wrong in what he's saying here at all, but I think just the way he put it across, it came across as quite to the point in a way that some fans think was maybe a misstep, in terms of, it feels like, even if this wasn't Brendan Rodgers' intention, it feels like you're putting the players in front of you for criticism before you take it on yourself. That's what it feels like to a lot of fans, Ryan.
I thought these comments were a shocker, to be honest, and I do agree with a lot of what he's saying, but if you were to change that, just for example, just playing devil's advocate and whatever, if you were to change the name of Brendan Rodgers to Neil Lennon, now it's the sort of comments that I would have expected 5 years ago, potentially, from a manager, not what I expect from Brendan Rodgers, which shows that he is feeling the pressure, because I don't think he comes out with those comments if he isn't feeling the pressure, clearly, because his team would be performing and winning games. I think there's a way you go about saying things, and that's just not the way. And the fact that he's saying it's a great bunch of lads, this and that, but then he's coming out with comments like that, it screams. And yes, I know they're two different things. I know that they can have really good off-field personalities, but on the field you're not up to standard. But I just think it's inconsistencies that are happening in these press conferences that just aren't going to be helping the team whatsoever. Because that will filter through to the players. The players will read that and be like, well, who's he talking about here? And that could cause a divide in the team. It's not helpful at this point. The team needs to be united at the moment, and I think those comments do anything but. I think it was a severe misstep by the manager, and I don't often say that because I think he's usually really good in front of the media, and we all like our box office Brendan moments, but that was box office for the wrong ways, in my opinion. I just thought it was a severe misstep from the manager.
Yeah, I understand that point of view. I just think that Rodgers, I think it's also true. I think if it was wrong and he said that, I would have more issue with it. But when I read it, completely. I don't think that Brendan Rodgers is wrong in what he's saying. And I understand maybe he should have said it differently or shouldn't have said it at all. But ultimately, as well, I do like to hear truth from people in the media. And I think basically what he's saying is accurate. You know, I do think ultimately that this is a Honda Civic squad, and that's a real problem for me, first and foremost. And I accept your point. Okay, I accept your point. Yes, it might prove to be a media misstep. It might prove to be a PR misstep, and as I say, I do think this will hang around. This will be on Brendan Rodgers' back for a wee while here.
Yep.
But I also don't disagree with him. Is what I'm saying, Ryan.
I don't, and it's one of those things. I think there was a quote in American media, and it's like, I mean, you're not wrong, but you didn't have to say it. But the fact that he said it in a public forum as well, I just don't think it helps. I agree with the sentiment. I agree with the meaning of what he said. I don't think the squad is up to standard. That's clear. Celtic are losing 2-0 to Dundee for the first time. They're losing to Dundee for the first time in 30 years. I agree that the squad isn't up to standard, but I just don't think it helps the situation whatsoever right now. That's my view on it. I agree with him, but I don't think that he should have said it.
And I think his general point was that this squad, he's been asked to do things with this squad that it's not capable of. I think was his overall point, which again, you can argue the merits of why he should be saying that publicly. And I do think he's in a difficult situation, but I do think, he does say consistently, it's my responsibility to change it, it's my responsibility to find answers. Unfortunately, that comes across as cheap deflection when you're not seeing the answers on the pitch. And I say this all, that I say it constantly, is that the most worried you are about a football team or about a sporting team of any description is when what you see on the pitch does not reflect what the manager is saying off the pitch. And when he talks about he wants his teams to be starting well in matches, I don't think Celtic have scored a league goal in the first 25 minutes this season, or something crazy like that.
February.
Yes, Celtic have been consistently poor in the first half of matches in all competitions for quite a while now. Going back beyond, as I've just alluded to there, Ryan, beyond the start of this season. The problems we're seeing in the Celtic squad have been there for, I would say, around 10, 11 months or so. Like, for basically this entire calendar year, I feel like Celtic have not been quite there. And there's been a regression both in performance, squad, what we're seeing from the manager, everything. There's been a trend of regression at Celtic over the last year that is no longer acceptable. And at some point, a line in the sand, and you need to go, well, what are the changes here that have to happen for this team to function better? And those are the difficult questions that are starting to come to the forefront of everyone's mind, regardless of their anger with the board and how Celtic were prepared. Ultimately, the people who carry the can are the players and the manager, unfortunately. And that's the situation and the pressure that Brendan Rodgers is feeling right now. My question to you, Ryan, is, can it get worse? Is this going to get worse before it gets better? And that's when I was watching the game unfold yesterday, that was a sinking feeling inside me of these seasons that come up every now and again where when you see a Celtic team play and perform, and your thought isn't, the Celtic are going to get over this and they're going to get through this. Your thought is, this is going to get worse over the next few weeks. This isn't the low point. As bad as a 2-0 defeat to Dundee, the first in 37 years is, the horrifying feeling for me is this isn't the worst this is going to get over the next few weeks. Celtic have to play Sturm Graz on Thursday, who are playing well in Austria and is trying to establish themselves in the Europa League. They've got Hearts at Tynecastle, and then there's Rangers at Hampden as well, coming up in short order. Now, when I say that, some people were saying to me on social media and saying to me, John, why are you fearing these teams? Why are you fearing Rangers at Hampden? And my response to that is, it's not about fearing Rangers, Ryan. It's about not trusting the Celtic team. It's not about fearing Hearts. It's about not having the belief in the Celtic team to go to Tynecastle and pick up a huge result. It's not about Sturm Graz. It's about Celtic going into Thursday and just being lethargic and starting the game slowly, and Sturm Graz hitting Celtic on the counter-attack and winning that match. It's not about the strength or weaknesses of these teams. It's about not having any faith at all in Celtic at the moment.
Yeah, when's the last time they won a big game? A pressure-filled game. I know you can maybe point to Motherwell, but it's Motherwell at home. Celtic should be winning that game. Not to sound demanding or expectant, but Celtic should be winning that game at home. And I completely agree with you. That is exactly the point that I wanted to make as well. I don't fear these teams. I fear what Celtic can be, unfortunately, in a negative sense. I fear what they can bring or not bring to the table. At these moments, I don't think we're at the worst point yet, unfortunately. Watching it yesterday, I'm like, this is a Dundee team that have not really had to do too much to win this game. You then look just ahead in the horizon. You get Sturm Graz, who are a good team, who beat Rangers on match day 2, who have been in the Champions League in recent years. They'll be a solid outfit. They'll bring a challenge. And then, but unfortunately for me, at the moment, just due to the way and I made this point on the post-match show yesterday, this European campaign is already causing a bit of a hindrance to Celtic's domestic troubles at the moment as well. They're just causing a headache. You've got a Thursday into a Sunday against a side that would happily, I think Hearts would happily play tomorrow if they had the chance. I think they're desperate to play Celtic at the moment. They'll be so up for that game at Tynecastle, and I worry about what mentality Celtic will have going into that game. I'm really quite concerned about that game at Tynecastle. I've watched what Hearts have done this season. They've been solid. Yes, they've dropped points here and there, but they've got goal scorers in their team. They've got goals all over the park. And unfortunately for Celtic, they're just not firing on any cylinders, not all cylinders. There's just no cylinders that are firing at the moment, and that's my main worry. But we've got the game on Thursday to worry about before the game on Sunday. It's just it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, and how are you feeling about this? And what do you want to see? What do you want to change in this team? Because as we know, some of the fringe players that we're talking about that we'll want to see more of at Celtic aren't even Europa League squads. So I think we're going to see quite a lot of similar personnel on Thursday. My question is, Brendan Rodgers talking about this change of formation. Are we going to see a back three from Celtic from the start of a match for the first time in a long time?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I'm stuck in this. Sorry, I'm just being honest.
I get it. I totally get it. Yeah.
I just feel like we're throwing stuff at the wall and hoping that it sticks. Unfortunately for Celtic at the moment, I don't see where the next goal is coming from. Never mind good result. And now the worry for me before the Dundee game and before the Motherwell game as well. You can bring Braga too. The past 3 games, Celtic have conceded 6 goals. Which is just not acceptable. The problem for me before those games was the fact that Celtic weren't scoring a lot of goals. Now they're conceding goals as well. So if you're not scoring goals and you're conceding goals and doubles and like duos or whatever, you're not going to win any games because you can't get back into the game. You're going 2-0 down against teams and you've not got the firepower to get yourselves back into the game. It's just that, I don't know, it's a really, really toxic coalition of a bad defence and a bad attack, and then you've got another problem which is in the middle between the attack and the defence, a completely dysfunctional midfield that is not working at the moment, regardless of the amount of changes that Brendan Rodgers makes to the side. It just isn't working, which would point to me, a change in formation needed, because you're going to have to stick with the same players until January. There's not that much choice, despite the squad depth that Celtic have in that area. There maybe needs to be a formational change to get the best, or to get better, to get something out of the midfield, because right now it's just not working. It's like a sieve. It just gets walked through, unfortunately.
If Brendan Rodgers starts Callum McGregor as a holding midfielder on Thursday, with Rio Hatate ahead of him. I'm going to be banging my head against the wall. And that's where I've got to with the frustration and what we're seeing from the shape of that midfield, how it's so easily bypassed, how it just lacks any kind of anything. I think when you're playing that, you need, again, like I say, you need a lot of help from your wingers at times. And I just felt there was moments against Dundee where Tenekte as well, off the ball, as well as on the ball, he just didn't quite seem to have that physicality that was needed at times. Less said about Yang, the better. I'm not even going to go into that. But you need those wingers to help that midfield. You need your fullbacks to help that midfield. And there's just a disconnect. There's too much distance between players. It doesn't look functional. And I just want to see something different from Brendan Rodgers. Now, Sturm Graz, they're top of the Austrian Bundesliga. They're 3 points clear of RB Salzburg with a game in hand. They've only played 9 games. Salzburg have played 10 games. So they're riding high. I think they picked up a 4-3 win yesterday. A lot of late goals, a lot of drama, but then ultimately that feeling of elation at the end. They're coming to Glasgow looking to pull off a kind of a double job against Celtic and Rangers. Of course, they beat Rangers at home last time. They were beaten by Midtjylland away from home on the first match day. So it's not as if this team are world beaters, but you just have this lingering thing in the back of your mind where, do you fancy Celtic to beat Sturm Graz on Thursday? And unfortunately, my gut feeling answer to that at the moment is no. And that's where I'm at the moment, regardless of what's ahead of that,
Is he just on the world beaters comment? Dundee aren't world beaters. Braga are certainly not world beaters as well. We're not playing against any big... I completely get your point. But Celtic aren't playing against the best sides at the moment. The reason why they're not playing against the best sides is because they couldn't get past FC Kairat, which, in hindsight, is probably a blessing because we don't need to see that every second week. Celtic playing this iteration of Celtic playing in the Champions League would just be damaging to all involved, I think. I think that's a blessing in
Brendan
disguise.
Rodgers, if he's making a Honda Civic analogy, what does that make Dundee? What kind of car does that make Dundee? Because if Celtic are a Honda Civic, then obviously Dundee are well below that, and had no right to really do what they did to Celtic yesterday. But they went out and did it. They earned that victory for me, Ryan. That's another worrying aspect of it.
And that's the comment. It's not the comment from Rodgers about Honda Civics. It's not as if Celtic are playing against Ferraris every week in the Scottish Premiership. They should have more than enough to beat the teams that are around them. That's the reason why Hearts are doing well at the moment, because they're beating the teams around them. They're making light work of a lot of teams. I mean, I watched the game on Saturday night between Hearts and I don't want this to turn into a Hearts podcast because they're getting plenty of praise everywhere else, and probably quite right.
You can go to the Hearts standard for that, everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. But they made light work of a team that Celtic struggled with in Kilmarnock. Yes, I know that was self-inflicted, a couple of the goals, but they forced that pressure onto Kilmarnock. They had a plan, they had a game plan, and they've got players that can individually impact games, and that was the case. Celtic are not coming up against Ferraris every week. They're hardly ever coming up against Ferraris because of the Europa League that they're playing in. They've got more than enough, or they should have more than enough to deal with the teams that they're coming up against. Unfortunately, this Honda Civic that they're driving is just... it needs its MOT or something. I don't know.
The problem with that is that it's quite an emotive line. It draws up imagery that everyone relates to. It's like something that everyone can kind of picture in their mind and riff off of ultimately at the end of the day as well. And that's also a problem with a comment like that, is that it's going to live on because people remember it. People remember the line. It's not the usual boring football speak that you hear from managers and players. And that's a problem for Brendan Rodgers because it is so memorable. This is something that is going to stick around. And as I say, unless results improve, then it's going to be used as a stick to beat him with. And that's probably my main reason for why he shouldn't have said it. As I said, I feel like he was accurate in what he said, but I just think putting in such a memorable, emotive comment out there is obviously going to become a talking point for weeks if results don't start improving. Raymond Haddon asking, is Bernardo injured? Bernardo's not injured. He was ill in the build-up to the Dens Park match, and that's why he wasn't involved. Brendan Rodgers said he was suffering from illness in the latter part of last week. In terms of other people, Alistair Johnston is coming back to contention. He was in training all of last week. Daizen Maeda had an hamstring issue that he picked up in the latter stages of the match against Motherwell, actually, but he still made the trip to Japan. Obviously didn't feature for Japan, and obviously you don't take a risk with a hamstring issue, so they're just waiting to see how he develops from there. So There's a few little injury niggles around the team, Ryan, which obviously doesn't help. But I mean, for me, and I've said this for ages, but the importance of getting Alistair Johnston back in that team is massive, because Celtic's right-hand side at the moment, it looks just horrendous, and then that is also impacting the left-hand side, which isn't looking great too, and the Kieran Tierney situation is a concern. And we're all watching that situation with horror as well as it unfolds, because you look at McGregor, even Cameron Carter-Vickers, you look at Kieran Tierney. These are the people who are supposed to be Celtic's leaders that spur Celtic on to heights this season that deliver success, but those are the players you look at the moment that you're particularly worried about.
It's the core. It's the core of the squad, and if that core's struggling, then those players that are coming in that are rotating, they're naturally going to struggle, because they don't have anything to feed off of those players that are usually at least a 7 out of 10, more often than not an 8 out of 10 in games and in years gone by. Unfortunately, those have went down to 5s and 6s, which is in turn hampering the team. Despite all the talk about the right hand side, and it's deservedly so because it's so weak. Watching that second goal yesterday, it was like slow motion. It was almost like a car crash. Watching it in slow motion, it was just, you knew what was coming, but due to Kieran Tierney being out of position, Tenecte not defending, and Liam Scales being brought out, and the boy on the wing just absolutely rinsed him for all it's worth, and it was in slow motion almost. You knew what was coming 10-15 seconds before it happened. But despite there being so much problems on that right hand side, the fact that there's also problems on the left hand side, and a team under a manager that relies quite heavily on the output of his wide players, that's a real problem going forward. Because every good Rodgers side has had good wingers. In his first spell.
That's the thing for me, and I just think when you don't have that, then you need to try something different. Dennis Jameson saying something has to change in the pack. The 4-3-3 does not work with the current team. Rodgers must change formation, stop playing Yang from the start, does not do anything good. A 4-2-3-1 or even go 4-4-2 or 3-5-2. People are just looking for something different. Again, none of the people, very few of the people in our chat will be coaches or qualified football experts. We certainly aren't.
No.
All we know is that what's currently being put out on the pitch isn't working. Brendan Rodgers is the man with the plan. He is the coach in charge of that situation. He does have a coaching staff. It is on them to find the solutions. We can discuss what kind of formation or what we want to see all day long, but ultimately you have to start to see that come up on the pitch as well. McLaughlin saying defeats the Grats and Hearts this week and it's game over. Dean McDonald saying lacking that spark, no drive or desire. Brendan hasn't exactly been helped, but he has to take some responsibility here. Nowhere near good enough. Combs saying, lads, it even comes down to the basics. Passing to feet is poor. Kuhn, Ida and Kyogo gone the last 10 months and not many goals came into the team. Defensively yesterday, very poor. Midfield too predictable. I guess another element of this is to date, until yesterday, Celtic defensively had looked pretty solid at times. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I think that had probably bailed out the team's attacking faults to a degree this season, because as much as Celtic weren't creating, they were actually performing defensively pretty capably well. Yesterday it came crashing down, and if the defending starts to regress to the same degree that Celtic's attacking output has regressed, then that's when you start to really worry about the direction of this season. Marcus Terro saying his comments are partially justified. The team play out the back like walking football. I've never seen anything in football so slow. Mark Fairfield saying, who signed off on the Honda Civic players? Exactly. The only thing elite about the manager is his deflection tactics, which are world class. Jason Mudgard making the point, can't the board use their wealth to employ a set piece coach? Current team wouldn't stop a Jaily piece. Set pieces are an issue, Ryan. We do see teams in the Premier League and even up here at times employ specialised set piece coaches. I think the belief is that Gavin Strachan does the majority of that work at Celtic, Ryan. But do Celtic need some sort of dedicated set piece coach here? My question is, would it hurt? I don't think it would hurt. And so, again, these are the kind of ideas that you're hoping the club are thinking about, Rodgers is thinking about, because he needs something different within his staff, within himself, to get something different out of these players.
I think they've needed one for years, to be honest with you, because the amount of corners and free kicks that Celtic get that they just don't utilise. You know, they've got such a big amount of corners, or a large amount compared to the other teams, due to the fact that they've got they put so much pressure on teams, particularly at home, but they also get a lot of set pieces away from home as well. They've got to be able to utilise these. Not to bring it back to the team that are currently top of the table, but they have employed a set piece coach at the start of the season, and that's bearing fruit already for them. They've got Craig Halkett that seems to score in every game for them, and that's not by chance. That's planned. That'll be planned. They'll be looking to utilise his prowess in the air, or his positioning, if he can get his foot on the end of chances. For me, I think that Celtic should have that. It's all about the modernisation of the club. Most teams have a set piece coach, a designated set piece coach that is his only job, whereas it seems as if it's just one of Gavin Strachan's tasks. I'd rather have somebody that is completely focused on that one area of the pitch, because it is a large area, both in attack and defence, and in areas. And I mean, even yesterday, it was a set piece that was the undoing of Celtic for the first goal. Who was marking that defender for the opening goal? You know,
he seems to break away from. Yeah, he seems to break away from Carter Vickers, it seemed like to me, watching it back. I don't know if that's accurate. I've not watched the game again this morning. I'm going to go through the game again this morning just to see. But it was a shambles, and set pieces are consistently an issue for Celtic, and a set piece coach might be able to keep up with modern trends and trends across the league and trends across other league, what's working in terms of set pieces, where our team's getting a slight advantage. Listen, I don't think set pieces are particularly game changers for sides, but I think in a particularly physical league like Scotland, and it can be your undoing, and I think we saw elements of that yesterday, where a team that is physical and does know that their biggest chances of the match are going to come down to these set piece opportunities, because they have 20% of possession, so naturally they're going to put a lot of stock into what can we break off Celtic here to try and get ahead in this match. And I think at that point Celtic need to respond to that, and yeah, it's pretty depressing, Ryan. Just to put it plainly, Gordon Cuthbert and saying, with all the car references, I wasn't sure if I was watching the Celtic Way or Top Gear. However, good show, guys. For me, we need to try 3 at the back. Not sure if we go 3-5-2 or 3-4-3. A lot of people sympathise with that. I'm going to bring in a comment from Paul Turner here. It's a bit of a longer comment, but I think it sums up where everyone is at the moment, or at least where I am. So thank you for that, Paul, for putting it in those terms. The board has let everyone down. The last transfer window was a disgrace. We incredibly came out of that in a dreadful position. However, the manager is coasting and hiding behind the situation with the fans and the board. He keeps picking the same players, the same horseshoe tactics. He had to change his original formation against Dundee. He's then thrown the team under the bus with a Honda Civic crack. And I think that a lot of people are waking up this morning going, this is a dire situation to be in. Well, how have we gotten to this stage from where we were from the highs of last season? What is going on here? And again, ultimately, Ryan, the board can't do anything at the moment. The only people who can change things at the moment is Brendan Rodgers and his squad. And hopefully we start to see that on Thursday. But when you say that, my gut feeling is that, as I said earlier, this is going to get worse. I'm not seeing any optimism in this team where I'm thinking we're just a wee bit away from clicking into gear. It just seemed miles off it yesterday, and that's where I'm at the moment. Unfortunately, I hate to say that on air. I hate to say that publicly, and say I think things are about to get worse at Celtic. But if I'm thinking plainly about it and thinking clearly about it, that is my gut feeling about this situation.
You would be accused of being delusional if you thought the other way. I think you're just being realistic, and I think there's a lot of Celtic supporters, people who cover Celtic as well, that are in the very same boat. I'm in the same boat. I don't see how this is getting better anytime soon. You look at the upcoming fixtures, compared to Dundee are not anywhere near the teams that they're going to be facing, that Celtic are going to be facing on Thursday and Sunday. That's my worry. The opposition are going to get better, and yet it seems with every passing game, Celtic seem to be getting worse. And some of the areas in which you thought that they could be relied upon, particularly defensively, they're now starting to show cracks, which is really, really quite concerning at October. And you're looking to people are already looking towards the January transfer window, which I don't see how that can change as well, given the way that Celtic have been operating in recent windows too. I don't see how Celtic are going to suddenly get out of jail because they've just been inept in the transfer window as well, and that comes down to the board and the recruitment. But still another just over 2 months before that transfer window opens, and it's a real tight squeeze in terms of all the fixtures between now and then before the transfer window opens. It's just a recipe for disaster, and we're at this point, and I would love to see it get better, but right now, hand on my heart, I don't see how it's getting better at the moment. I don't see what can change, and if anything does change, I'd be majorly surprised. But at this present time, I just don't have confidence in a lot of the different sectors of Celtic. Unfortunately, people wonder why, and people ask why the Celtic fans are protesting. Just watch yesterday. That's why they're protesting. They've got every right to protest, given the way that Celtic are functioning, both on and off the park at the moment. They're justified.
The reason they're protesting in that manner is that they saw it coming as well. Again, this isn't a reaction to poor results.
No.
None of what the fans are going through is a reaction to difficult results. The difficult results aren't helping, but the feelings and the anxieties and the worries of a lot of people within the Celtic support and a lot of people within those protest groups are that this has been building for a while, and it's a systemic failure across a number of years that has built to this moment. This isn't because Celtic got beat 2-0 against Dundee or even got put out of the Champions League. That was just an instigating event to bubble everything over the surface almost, and I think that's what the problem is. And yeah, we take a deep breath and we go into a new week, Ryan. There's going to be lots to discuss this week, as we know. We thank everyone in the live chat for joining us today again. Very lively debate. Good chat in the live chat. Appreciate all your comments. I've tried to bring in a lot of them. Leave comments below. Let us know what you're thinking about everything. I doubt there'll be too many feeling differently to what the general feeling is at the moment, Ryan, which is
It's a pretty safe bet.
Yeah, it's effectively Celtic. Get a grip of yourselves and start to put this right. That's what needs to happen here, because there's a lot of people at the club letting themselves down from the very bottom to the very top, and we need leadership in that club somewhere to take control of the situation and figure out a way to move forward. And I just don't see it at the moment, unfortunately. I don't see it on the pitch. I don't see it in the dugout. I don't see it in the boardroom. I don't see any aspect of leadership that's given me a positive impression at the moment. And when that happens and you've got a tough set of fixtures ahead and you don't have too many opportunities to try and affect change in terms of the transfer window, etc., then it looks like a downward curve. And they may prove us wrong, and we would be delighted if they do, but that's how I feel. Anything you want to say, Ryan, before we head off?
Just that I don't like being negative going on to these shows, but unfortunately that has been the case. And if you were anything other than negative, it would be unfortunately delusional at this moment in time, because it's a wholly negative situation that Celtic have got. And I know I like to be positive about things. I like the glass half full attitude when it comes to things. But I can't paint it any other way than what we're all feeling at the moment. But it has been brewing for a while, even though we tried to look for some of the positives earlier on in the season. There was that lingering doubt in the back of your mind that was like, this could all fall to pieces quite easily if a couple of bad results are put together, if the recruitment isn't right, if the fans begin to revolt, if the manager has questionable statements in the press conferences. And unfortunately that is the case. And Celtic are going to need to, between now and January at least, are going to need to find a way of working and getting results consistently, because this snowball effect
Thursday,
that I keep on...
Yeah, January, the team now in Thursday. And look, it makes me worry as well, Ryan. Sorry, I don't want to continue the show too much, but just to add to your point, it's like Rodgers was speaking just before the international break that these matches every few days, it doesn't allow him to do much on the training pitch because a lot of it's about recovery. And then you're not really getting time to work on. But even that, does Rodgers need to think of ways of changing up the training setup at Celtic and figure out how to get these blocks of education and different systems and formations, etc., into these players? Because right now the kind of process of match recovery isn't working either, Ryan, is what I'm saying. We're not seeing that is also not working. So that's another worry.
It's a direct consequence of the fact that, and I know that you would still get it to an extent if you were in the Champions League, but adding that Thursday night into Sunday games does not help the situation either. That extra day, which gives you even less to prepare for the Sunday game. So then the fixtures pile up. It's terrible. As much as we say we don't like international breaks, I'm actually liking them at the moment because I don't need to watch this team as much. And that's unfortunately how I feel at the moment about the way that Celtic are playing. I don't want to feel that way, but I've got to be honest about the situation. And right now, I'm not entertained watching Celtic. I am not enjoying watching this team play football. And it's up to Brendan Rodgers to change that, because at the moment they're not getting results. I wouldn't complain as much if they were getting results, but unfortunately they're not playing well and they're not getting results. So naturally you're going to have to complain.
Okay, everyone, thanks for joining us today. Thanks for joining the live show. We'll be back tomorrow morning. As always, we'll have stuff going up on the website as well later. I think we've got an interview with Callum McGregor coming up this evening if you want to read that, so check that out. We thank everyone for joining us, and we'll see you again next time on the Celtic